Welcome to the Parent Information Series. We are going to be talking about communication today. My name is Kim Klemick. I'm one of the program directors for the ABA. Today, overall, we're going to talk about communication as a whole. How do we communicate? Obviously, there's lots of various ways to get our thoughts and feelings known to others. And then we're going to talk about why we communicate the way we do, why we choose one form of communication over another at any given point, and why our children do that as well. And then from there we're going to talk about how we can improve the communication, how we can expand on the skills that they already have to keep growing those communication skills and leaning towards more appropriate communication than they may have now. Well then, so that's the overview. Communication is, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we already talked about it, but it's a lot of things, right? It's emails, it's texting, it's talking face-to-face, it's phone calls, it's talking politely, it's yelling, it's a lot of things when we're talking about words in general. And we have motivations and reasons for doing one or the other, just like our students and our kids do. Sometimes it's just easier to shoot a text message so you don't have to get into a long conversation. Sometimes it's easier to pick up the phone and call because your other hand is busy doing something else, so you can't type. Or sometimes you're not going to be able to be at the computer, and so you need to call. And sometimes you can't call somebody because you're in the middle of something else, and so you can type. There's always motivations for choosing which way we communicate. And so when we're trying to teach our children which way is the most appropriate way to communicate at any moment, we want to be thinking about that motivation. Communication obviously is also body language, and the two key pieces about that when we're thinking about our children is one, that we can read their body language really well, particularly you guys can read their body language really well. So very often you know what they are thinking or feeling without them having to say words. And sometimes we respond based on that knowledge, but then they're not having to come out and tell us, or they're not necessarily developing, particularly talking about feelings and things they don't like and things they don't want. Sometimes that is hard to come along because we already know they don't like it because they're pouting or crying, and so we don't necessarily prompt that verbal language that go along with that. The other piece to remember is that generally with kids who are on the spectrum and kids who have language challenges, they're not necessarily reading other people's body language particularly well or at all. So they're not necessarily going to respond in the same way because they don't understand what that means. So we need to help give them words to understand that. And perspective taking is something that's challenging for kids on the spectrum. So if they're feeling happy and somebody across from them is crying, they don't necessarily connect that that kid shouldn't be happy or why that kid is not as happy about that thing that they like as they are. And so some of those little things come in when we're trying to develop their communication because they're not picking up on the nonverbal cues as well as some others might. Obviously, gestures are there, and again, sometimes our kids fall back on those gestures because they're easier, because words are hard, and because sometimes saying certain words is difficult, or they know that you know what that means, so why bother to make a full sentence? And there's obviously those other forms of communication which this group doesn't necessarily need to deal with because you guys have words, but there's lots of different forms and lots of visual representations that might in fact still help some of your guys to build on that language. They can use words, but if they're having trouble with putting a longer sentence together, sometimes the sentence strip from Picture Exchange may be helpful because you can add spaces, you can add some of those extra words, you can create scripts for some of those social conversations that may actually be helpful even though they have the words, sometimes those pictures help them to expand it. So, this also still sometimes comes up. Sounds like with all of your little gentlemen, some of the time, even though they're developing words, they're still choosing to communicate that they're unhappy or that they want something or that they don't want something by some of these problematic behaviors. And so, our job is to figure out why. And again, usually it's because it's easier, it's maybe more effective and more efficient. If you're in the middle of cooking dinner and somebody says, hey mom, can I blah blah blah, you might go, oh, not right now, and not necessarily attend to it because you're in the middle of something. But if we get a fall down screaming tantrum, you're probably going to respond to it in some way because it's really obvious. So sometimes those behaviors stick around because they're the most effective, because they can try to use their words, but it doesn't necessarily always get understood or heard or responded to. But generally speaking, throwing themselves on the floor and screaming gets a reaction from at least some people, and it maybe isn't even you, but somebody is probably in their life still reacting to that at least some of the time, and so those behaviors stick around longer than we'd like them to. And again, sometimes it's because they don't have the vocabulary. In Nicholas's case, it may be because he has sort of the vocabulary in English, but not necessarily the vocabulary in Vietnamese, or vice versa. And so he doesn't know which one he's supposed to use, or which, how to fill in the words, so he doesn't necessarily use the words.
Well, he communicates in English.
He communicates in English.
There's only a few words in Vietnamese that he spits back to me, but he understands Vietnamese too.
Okay. So, but when it's coming out, he maybe is not quite sure which ones to use and when, and again, he's still developing that English vocabulary as he's getting more exposed in school, and so he may not know how to put those full sentences together. And it seems like for him, it's also a comfort level. In this environment, I know I can talk. And this is easy and comfortable because I know what to talk about. Saw him at playtime. Chatting, I've never heard him speak so much because he was talking about toys and he was talking about the play food and his friends were there, smiling, talking, clear as day, loud, normal volume. But half an hour before that, when it was not playtime and I was asking him a question, I got a whisper and no response for a while, and then I modeled the response, and finally I got a response back in a whisper because he wasn't sure, he wasn't comfortable. But in the play context, he knows that everybody can say whatever they want, and it's comfortable and fun, and it was amazing. Articulation, clear as day, everything. So it's, again, that in certain contexts, for him, the motivation is there, or the comfort is there. How do we bring that to everywhere? How do we show him that that's what we want and expect all the time? And again, we often fall back on those things that we've already done because they worked before. So they're going to still work. And the new stuff, maybe it works. But the old stuff, I know it works. For years it's been working. Since I was an infant, I screamed and cried and I got fed. Somebody came to talk to me, figure out what was wrong. So I know that works. So that's the fallback. And we want to sort of show them that there are other things that work. And then we want to really start making it clear that those problematic behaviors don't work anymore. And then even, the simple sentence or the one-word sentence maybe doesn't work anymore. You can say more than that. You need to tell me, I want the toy, please, because I know you can't. I'm not going to give it to you until you give me that whole sentence, because that's the next step. Or, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to, we're both going to take turns talking. And so, I'm going to prompt you to stop and go and stop and go, and we're not going to get to go play until we do that. Or I'm not going to give you tons of attention for talking about the thing that you want until first we talk about how your day was at school. And then we can talk about whatever you want, because usually it's funny. and entertaining. But we want to teach them that that big reaction is going to happen with the new conversation and the new skills, and not so much the old skills that they don't need anymore. So I'm going to go through a little bit and kind of give the outline for the steps, and then we can kind of go child by child and see if we can get through some of that for the particular things that we need. So the first step, and we kind of did this earlier, was what does it look like now? What can he do? And what can he do sometimes, but maybe not always? And what kinds of communication? It sounds like all of these guys are pretty good at telling you what they want. Sometimes good at telling you that they don't want something. And the sort of back and forth conversation is harder, and the social conversation sometimes is harder. So we know where they're at. And thinking about, again, what's needed at home. Are we really in the habit of, oh, I know that he is going to be hungry at 5 o'clock, so I'm just going to make it, and he's going to eat? Or does he have to let me know when he's hungry? Does he have to let me know what happened at school? Or do I, that's not usually required, and so then when I ask, he's surprised and doesn't know how to answer. And again, thinking about how we're responding to the communication attempts. Because it's really, really, and I'm certainly guilty of it. I think teachers everywhere are guilty of it, and probably parents as well. Bad stuff's easier to notice. The loud stuff's easier to notice. And so sometimes when they are making a communication attempt that is appropriate, we don't necessarily pay as much attention to it. Or, the stuff that comes out that sounds ridiculous is funny. I'm thinking of Pierce. The things that come out of his mouth are hysterical, so he gets a lot of attention for it because he's funny. And then if you're having a normal conversation, probably nobody's going to be cracking up laughing because, it's not that funny. So how do we shift that and show him that other conversations can be fun too? And then when he tells us the same thing that he told us 5 times the other day that was funny then, maybe we don't laugh anymore. Kind of move on from that. But really thinking about how do we respond, because sometimes we are shaping their behavior. Often we are shaping their communication behavior without even really realizing it. Okay, so step 2, what would we like it to look like? And again, we kind of talked about that. So what's the next step? We'd like to see some more communication with peers. We'd like to see less yelling and screaming and flapping. And again, there's the big goal of, I'd love to see all of these guys, and it certainly sounds, completely doable, that they're chatting it up with all their friends and chatting it up with whoever's around, talking about their environment, talking about all sorts of things in the not too distant future. Longer sentences and things like that. All of these guys seem to have those stepping stones, but we're not going to get, a 5-minute conversation right now. So what's the thing you want to work on now? Because we want to make sure that they can be successful and that it's a positive thing that we're asking for this communication. And then we start building those skills. And again, we may need to prompt them a lot. We may need to model exactly what to say. We may need to write out or do picture scripts at first for some different topics, or practice some of those social situations at home with you guys first, and then maybe with a really familiar child if we're trying to build some of those friend-type conversations. But they don't have this skill in their repertoire solidly yet. They may have bits and pieces of it, but they don't have it solidly, so how do we help them make it solid? And the big key is making sure we're reinforcing them. And I think for most of these guys, at least from what I know so far, attention is big, and it's enough to want to continue doing it as long as it's consistent and more than they're getting for the other stuff. Because if it's the same, if you're just as excited when they do this new thing as when they do the thing that they already know how to do, they're not going to try harder to do the new thing. So we want to make sure that we're really reinforcing, and with extra special if we need it. If we want to have a some sort of a reinforcement chart for trying to have a conversation, because it's not something that's easy. We can, add that extra in for now, because when it becomes easier and more natural for them, they're not going to need that forever. But right now, when it's hard, they maybe need that extra push to be able to go that next step. And then, of course, we give lots and lots and lots and lots of opportunities for practice. So we set it up as frequently as we can. We don't give them everything they're looking for, so that they have to ask us in a full sentence, can I please have the TV on, please? Or, my guess is that most of these guys have figured out how to do that kind of thing by now. So maybe if you're looking for some of those request type things, you hide the remote. And they have to come and find you, and they have to ask in a full sentence. Or, if it's a conversation thing, we have to, every day when we come home from school, we're gonna practice talking. And once we're done, then we can do this. But we're gonna do this every day, or we're gonna do this when we get home from school, and we're gonna do this at the dinner table, just for a minute. Just trying to maybe have that back and forth. Maybe for Zach it's 4 times. Maybe, it's about one topic, and then another day you do another one. But you want to make sure to be planning for opportunities, because sometimes they come up, but we want them to come up a lot, so that they get comfortable, so that this becomes easy, and then they don't need the extra prompts, and they don't need the extra reinforcement. And then, once we get that back and forth exchange for maybe 3 back and forths, then we step it up. Or once we get it at home, then maybe we try and practice it with a friend. Or, whatever the next step is, we take those small steps. And then we let them know that we're changing the requirements. That's one of the things that's important, is keeping them aware of what's expected of them. And communicating across their lives with what's expected of them. Kids pull this all the time, where they chat up a storm at home and then they don't say a word at school, and so we don't know that they can. And so we're, expecting maybe a point or maybe 1 word, and then mom comes in one day and is like, oh, he can say, I want the cookies, please. He's been saying that for 1.5 years. We're like, oh, or vice versa. Sometimes it happens where we're getting whole sentences, conversational talk at school, and, we come to a meeting and, mom or dad is like, really? Because we really just, he points and we give it to him and he doesn't say anything, because that expectation has not been made clear that it's across the board. So that's another big thing to keep in mind, particularly with communication. And so talking with the teachers in the school, talking with the speech therapists, and anybody else who may be interacting with them on their communication, that's what's expected. So these examples, I'm not going to waste our time on these examples, because we have 4 examples right here. So let's see how we can do. I'm just going to check the time really quickly so we can try and space it out a little bit. So each of you have a few minutes to kind of go through. Who would like to go first? Who's going to be brave? Excellent. Thank you very much.
I don't know if it falls in. I would assume it falls in. Like I said, Liam, he has an extensive vocabulary. He's gotten a lot better with talking. Like the dinner table, I would ask him how his day went. It was like blank stare. You ask him, but a lot of times it sounds very rehearsed and very robotic. Like, he could tell me his schedule, and it's true. I could go to his schedule of things he does every day. But then when you go to talk, okay, well, what did you do at Saturdays? It does, I don't know if it's a lack of vocabulary or if it's just he just doesn't know how to respond to that. So, a lot of, even though he's done really well, I know with autistic children, some of the language, they can sound very robotic and it's almost rehearsed. So, I don't know if that's a communication. Well, he talks very loud, and you're trying to be like, okay, quiet down. He doesn't seem to quite understand that that's not appropriate to talk really loud, and talk at a much lower tone voice.
So it sounds like the 2 small steps for him would be appropriate voice volume and expanding some of the things he can talk about in a more naturalistic way.
But yeah.
Okay. So that's step 1 and step 2. We figured out what the goals are and what's going on right now. So step 3 is actually figuring out what we want to teach. With voice volume, I've worked with kids sort of with both ends of the problem, but with kids who I can't get to say anything loud enough that I can hear it, and kids who are really loud, and kids who just don't know when to be loud and when to be quiet. Actually, the young woman, the ABA specialist who's been working in their classroom, has worked out a number system which seems to be working really well. And so she's like, a number 1 is like a whisper, she models it, and that's when we use that in the library, or when, and then, like a number 5 is the playground voice, and you can yell as loud as you want, and I don't remember all the numbers, but you can make it appropriate to you, and then you're kind of constantly reminding and modeling that level of voice. And then again, the key is, if you really want that level of voice, you say, I'm going to talk to you when you're at this level, and you're modeling it, and then you kind of wait for it to come down. Or with our other little friend, he at school a lot of times likes to really use that whisper voice. And so we basically keep asking the question until we get that voice that's at appropriate level. Oh, now I know what you said, even though, I heard him enough when he was whispering. Some of the time I really can't actually hear, but, oh, so that's it. That's the voice I'm looking for, and then lots of reinforcement for that. So coming up with some sort of a scale, and again, talk to them at school. They may have something like that in place, because again, a lot of little kids have that trouble as far as when to use the outside voice, when to use the inside voice, and then lots of practice modeling it. I mean, you can go through and just practice the scale. Okay, show me the number 5. Show me the outside voice. Perfect, that's great. Show me the number 1. Can we really do the number 1 voice? And just practicing it out of context, and then when it comes up. And again, setting up as many opportunities as you can.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's necessarily a lack of understanding, because we've been in the mood, we'll say, like, you can't really talk, you have to whisper. And he'll be like, we have to whisper in the movies. And yes, but he'll keep repeating it.
Yeah.
One
of the other things
Okay.
that may be helpful, I don't know if you have a video camera or an iPad or something like that, recording it and really kind of letting him hear back the difference, and kind of like, he thinks he did a whisper voice. So let's play it. That's not actually a whisper voice. That's even with my voice now. Let's try again and see if we can get it quieter. See if you can hear the difference. And usually those things are kind of cool. Is anytime you mix in technology, usually they're like, yeah, let's play that. There is a game on an iPad called Talking Tom, which Ludwika has played with some of these guys before. And so Tom will repeat what you say, but only if you say it loud enough. So that's a helpful thing to do for kiddos, maybe like Nicholas, who sometimes has that whisper voice. Talking Tom doesn't hear you if you whisper. He's not going to repeat it because the mechanism doesn't hear that well. So, and for loud, it may just be more obvious. And you can maybe exaggerate it. Record him and then turn the volume up. See, that's really loud, and kind of exaggerate it so that he does start to hear the difference. Because I think you're probably right. He's not necessarily noticing the difference because it doesn't come up all that much. But the more you can practice it and the more you can kind of point out the differences and show him the differences, hopefully that becomes more clear. And then as far as the expanding on the conversation, it may be a matter of trying to build in some of that vocabulary. So maybe you find out exactly what he did at school. So you don't actually have to, you're asking him, but you already know the answers.
Right.
So you can model it, and then you can practice saying it a couple different ways to try and help with that robotic. Practice practicing saying things differently and modeling things differently is usually helpful. Again, they might end up sort of sticking with what's most comfortable, but as you know, if you pick just a couple, then at least they can vary between those two types of phrases. I wouldn't necessarily throw, you know, a different type of phrase every time. So say we're practicing the "what did you do at school" conversation. You know he played with blocks with Joey, and so maybe you model a couple of different ways to say that over, you know, the next couple of conversations. So then he gets comfortable with both of those. Because sometimes the robotic talk happens because that's the one I'm comfortable with. I'm sticking with that one.
Yeah, no, I think that does make sense, because even like I'll try and tell them, like, after the weekend, you know, you had a really fun weekend, we did this and this, and I'll pick a student like, oh, you can tell, you know, Leah, you did this, this, and this, and then he gets really excited. Oh yeah, I'll make sure I tell them that I watched this movie, I did this and this. So just modeling, making a conversation.
Yep, and keep it simple for now until you see some of those become comfortable. You know, you see him get excited and go, I can do that, and then you add some more and you vary some more. Because if we add too much, then it all just goes and he's like, that was all confusing. I'm going back to the thing I know how to say. And or, this is all overwhelming, I don't want to have this conversation because I know it gets confusing. So again, we want to get back to that. Practice it and reinforce what's happening. You know, so, hey, you know, you just told me a new thing you did at school. That's awesome. Let's, you know, either, you know, lavishing with attention, if that does the trick, or if it gets to be, I mean, sort of envisioning a little bit that other kiddos might really resist the idea of having to have that conversation because it's not his idea. And so really stepping up the reinforcement, and you can't force it. You know, you certainly can't make somebody have a conversation. You can't actually adjust their vocal cords. You can't do anything of the sort. So it's always a choice, but making it, you know, you can have lots of my attention and lots of good things if we try this quick, easy conversation, or you can do something that's a lot less fun. So if there's something that they like to do when they get home and really like to do it, awesome, you know, we're going to get to do that, but first we have to do this, and then we're going to do that. And you can kind of wait them out. And again, you don't have to sit there and wait forever if they don't have the conversation. All right, well maybe we'll have that conversation tomorrow, and then you can get that video game. For today, maybe, you know, there's other things you can play with that you like, okay, or you can do that thing. But that thing that you really, really like, we can have once we have this conversation. And again, the initial step is really, really easy. Like one new sentence, or, you know, how was school today? It was good, Dad. You know, for now, keep it really easy and something that they can do with minimal help. And show them, okay, that's all you had to do. Now you can go do this. And then slowly start building up the vocabulary, start building up to, tell me one thing you did at school today. Just one thing, and then you can do that. And if you don't want to talk about it, that's okay. Because one of the other things we get into is the sort of power struggle of it all. And we don't want talking and conversation to become a negative theme. We don't want it to be this awful thing that they hate to do and they dread every time they come home and they have to do this thing. And we also don't want to give them tons of attention for refusing to do this thing, which easily can happen because we're like, come on, you can do it, just one sentence, come on, and then we're going to get that, you know, and that whole thing sometimes is more than enough attention for them. They're perfectly happy to just have this debate. Because that's fun for them, and that's sort of communicating for them, and they can watch. Sometimes the body language they can seem to notice, like they do tend to notice when the face gets red and mom or dad is getting uncomfortable and upset, and sometimes they really actually like that more often, you know, than the good stuff. You can say, you did a great job, honey, 5 times, and they're like, okay, whatever. But the yelling, mad face is, you know, there's veins popping out and I can see changes in color, and that's more exciting. So sometimes it's a matter of the type of attention they're looking for, and so you want to be careful of making sure to hold that attention for the things you're looking for. And really, okay, I can't force you to have that conversation. Maybe we'll try again later, and then maybe you try again at dinner time. And when we have that conversation, we can then do this. Or when we have that conversation, I'm going to then play with you, and I'm going to keep talking to you and keep giving you attention. Whatever it is, if that's what they're looking for, hey, you can come sit with me while I'm cooking dinner. We can talk, and we can talk about this, and I'm going to keep paying attention to you. But if you want to keep saying that same phrase over and over again, I'm going to cook dinner. But if you're ready to try and talk about something, we can talk about this, or we can talk about this, and I'll gladly keep talking. If we're going to go back to that same phrase, or sometimes kids get in that sort of circular talk of perseverating on some topic, or even maybe for your guy, it's we said it that way already. If you want to try and talk about it another way, we can talk about it. But we already said it that way, so we're all done talking if you want to keep saying it that way. And kind of trying to draw those lines. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, again, step 4 is making sure to practice, and figuring out when they seem to be more comfortable with it, when you don't have to pull it out of them as much, when you don't have to give them the words as much, and then going, okay, so now what's the next step? And making that clear to them. You did a really great job talking about this. Now what I really want is we're going to try talking about this, or now we're going to try saying it in a different way. So if you tell me in a different way, then we get the sticker. Or you tell me in a different way, that's when I get excited. When you tell me in the same way, I'm going to go, oh, that's the same way. And varying it up that way, and then building. And again, communicating with all of the people around and going, okay, so now he's doing it at home. Is he doing it at school? And how can we get him to do it at school? Or can we get him to do it on the playground, or at church, or somewhere else? Can I get him to do it with me and his dad and his mom and his grandmother and whoever else? Because sometimes, he's comfortable with this. We've been practicing this, me and mom or me and dad. And then somebody else tries it, feels less comfortable. So then we want to make sure it gets comfortable. Because it's only something that's really a skill they're going to use when it's comfortable across the board. So we don't want to say they have it if it's still only comfortable at the dinner table with mom. We want to keep working on that skill until we can be like, okay, go tell your friend that story. So that makes sense. So we've kind of gone through steps 1 through 4 with that. Kind of touched on a little bit of pieces, because some of it is similar. Who else wants to kind of go one by one through? We talked a little bit about, the voice volume thing, I think, is also something that would be helpful for Nicholas, so we kind of had the steps of that, and that's something that we have tried some at school as well. Again, it sounds like the voice volume is more of a concern in the quiet end at school and more of a concern on the loud end at home. But so overall, if we're working together and we come up with a number system, I don't yet have a number system in place. Cicely doesn't yet have a number system, I don't think, in place for him. But if we come up with that same system and we share it, then we can be reminding him in both places that that's happening. And I think the biggest piece for Nicholas is building up that vocabulary and getting him to be comfortable using it in lots of different places and at lots of different times. Because I've heard it come out, and I know it's in there, but he still seems to only be comfortable using it in certain times. So again, the more we practice those words, particularly at home where he is comfortable, the more you can practice some of that English vocabulary and building on that. And it's okay to, obviously, you want to share your culture and language with him at home too. So I'm certainly not saying don't ever do that, but because he is comfortable talking at home, it's a great time to start expanding on his language. So like you were saying, now you don't get anything if you just say book, or even if you just say I want book. Now you need to say I want the book, please, because we're working on getting him up to those 5-word sentences. So be thinking about you need to tell me in more words, and then I'll get you what you want. And really practicing that at home where he's already getting a lot of words, and then building that up at school, and then starting to kind of vary it at home. And so the problem at home was getting really loud, and also using the problem behaviors as opposed to the words, right? So again, going back to he's using those problem behaviors because they're easiest and they work and they get the biggest reaction. So trying your hardest to stay neutral when those happen and prompt the language and then responding to that. Obviously, he's got siblings at home, you said?
2 brothers, yeah.
So it's going to be hard to tell them, don't react if Nicholas pushes you. But are they older than him or younger?
He's the oldest. He fights, and then even when I give him timeout, and I let him out, he goes back into timeout. Like he repeats the same thing that has happened. So it's like, oh.
So
Yeah.
So what that's saying is that timeout seems like it should be punishing to you, but it's not punishing to them, because punishment means the behavior goes down. Punishment means we've made it not worth doing. So clearly timeout has not made it not worth doing. So we need to think about what makes it not worth doing. And we need to think about building the other responses so that they're just easier. So that it doesn't have to be this big, long thing. So that he can say, I want the ball, and get it from his brother without biting. And so that when he does bite, maybe it's not time out, it's whatever you were trying to get, you're not getting. And maybe it's not available for the rest of the day.
Oh my gosh, these screeches.
Brian used to do that in timeout. You put him in timeout, he would just scream like bloody murder. And then he'd be like, 2 minutes later he'd be done with it. But we went through, like, whenever we put him in timeout, he'd do the same thing. He doesn't do that so much anymore, but the timeout, it still doesn't work.
Well, and the thing of it is, of course, it's a lot easier for me to say to ignore all this behavior
It's so hard.
than it is to actually do it. The key is, if you're going to set this as the rule, you have to be able to follow through with it every single time. So if what you're saying is taking something away for the whole day is never going to be something you can actually follow through with because it's just going to make your day a disaster, then don't set it up like that. But maybe it's, you can have this back when you use your words. I'm going to put it up here, and you can scream and cry all you want. And I'm going to remove your little brother so he can't react and he can't get hurt anymore. And you can stay here, and when you're ready, you can use your words, and then you can have a turn. And try and move on from something else. And then, maybe you're modeling the whole phrase, and he's just repeating it after you, and that's okay. Okay, you gave it a try. Maybe you get, at least part of a phrase for now. And okay, well, you tried to use your words, and then you kind of start to go with that. It's a lot easier for me to say, because this is sort of like the big piece of problem behavior, right, is it no longer gets the reaction. It no longer serves that function that it had, which was to get everybody freaking out and or get access to something that I didn't have access to before, just to get some attention. And it's really hard to go, wow, you just bit your brother, and I'm going to pretend that didn't happen. You don't have to pretend it didn't happen, but the consequences should definitely not be anything that they might be looking for. And usually a big piece of that is attention. A huge piece of that is often attention. And knowing the kiddos that I know, it's usually a huge piece of that. And whether it's you did a good job or whether it's I'm really upset with you, if they get any kind of reaction, that's enough to do it again. So we want to stay as neutral as we can and set up when you choose to do this behavior, which is what we prefer, which is, better communication and or keeping your hands to yourself, giving me one comment about school, asking for a turn with the ball. Obviously, with younger siblings, it's a little harder, and that's the case with all of you guys. You have just the one.
Yeah, I'm not ready for that next one.
That's okay. But the trouble with the younger siblings is we can't teach the little ones to respond. So we want to set up situations where we can be there, where we can see it, where we can prompt that appropriate interaction and make sure it happens. Because unfortunately, what works with the little ones is ripping it out of their hands, or hurting them, or some other thing, because they don't know what the words mean either. Or they don't know how they're supposed to respond. So this is where setting up those opportunities to have that positive interaction before the negative one even happens is a good idea. So you know that the little one's got something that Nicholas wants, or that Zach wants, or that Pierce wants, or you're at the playground or something, or you have a friend over, and you know that there's going to be a chance that something's going to happen, and his reaction is likely to be physical because that's what's worked before. And then you step in before that happens. Oh, let's ask little brother, little sister for a turn. And he uses his words, and you get the little one to hand it over, and you quickly give the little one something else, or a hug, so that they're not freaking out. Hey, that was really great, and try and set up those positive interactions as much as you can. And be one step ahead of some of those negative reactions, so those happen less, and then you don't have to try and ignore it as much. Obviously, the reality is those are still going to happen, and we're still going to have to respond. But the more we can stay neutral, the more we can say, this is how you can do it instead. If you really want this, here's what you got to do. If you don't want to do that, okay. Check you later. We'll talk in a minute. And they're likely to keep trying to get your attention. And you can, keep modeling the appropriate thing to do. And if they don't do it, they don't do it. You move on. You maybe try and get them to do something else. Again, not that thing that they really want. But, okay, well, why don't you go, you can do this or this instead. Sometimes it's a big, long standoff. I think we talked about this at one point at the house with going skating, something like that. Basically, you can go, if you want, and if you're not ready, it became this big conversation. And so we basically said, well, you can choose to go or not go. At 2:30, it's not an issue anymore because we've missed it. And it's sort of a natural consequence. And then not having that struggle, because it sounded like that struggle was a lot of fun. Because in the end, he wanted to actually go. He had fun when he went. But that struggle was fun too. And so let's have this for a while, and then we're going to get to go skating eventually. So then it's, well, you can choose. You can go or you can not go. We're not going to really talk about it. You can get that thing you want. Here's how you get it. You can tell me one sentence about how your day went. You can tell your little brother or little sister, I want the toy, please, and I'm going to make sure you get a turn. Or, whatever the case may be. Does that all sound... I mean, again, it's never going to be like, oh, and then I'm going to go home and it's going to be perfect. And every single time he does this, I'm going to be able to not react at all. But remember that the more consistent you are, and the more consistent you can get everybody else in their lives to be, because that's also a key, I did it, and I've been doing this every day. But it doesn't matter because Grandma does it differently. And what he remembers is that sometimes it works. He doesn't necessarily remember that it only works with Grandma, or maybe he does, and so it continues with Grandma. Or maybe it's, I know that sometimes people give into this. Even if it's never Mom, I know that sometimes this works. Or it's, Dad always does it this way, but, in this place, so the more consistency, the clearer it is for them, the more they understand what's expected, the more they start to value the kinds of communication that we're trying to teach them, and the easier it becomes for them, so then thereby the less struggle it becomes for you to get it out of them. So be thinking about small steps. Things that they can almost do is the first step, getting one extra word, or getting it to change just a little bit, or getting one back and forth with a friend, or, you know, my day today was good. You know, getting that voice volume at home to that conversation level one time, you know, okay, that was quiet enough, go ahead. Or, you know, getting him to say one time and then building from there. But making it clear to them, because the less clear it is, the more they're going to test the boundaries and the longer they're going to test the boundaries. Because we're always likely to see a little bit of like, but this worked before. I'm going to throw myself harder on the floor. I'm going to get louder. I'm going to wait longer and see when you give in. And if they know that if you wait long enough, you're going to give in, or if they get loud enough, you're going to give in, or whatever your threshold is, they're going to take it there. And you don't want it to go there. So you want to be able to set the level at something you know you can follow through with, something you can make sure happens, and again, setting up situations so that if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, because you're not going to get into that power struggle. But if it does happen, really awesome things happen. So you probably want to give it a try. But you really, at this point, you know, as they get bigger, and as, you know, we can't actually physically force them to do much. Nor if we want to, you know, be doing that. And so the bottom line is it's always a choice for them how they respond. Our job is to present choices in a way that we'd like to see them and guide them towards the right choice. And not respond when we see things that we don't want to see. And then the big piece is, of course, building those, you know, we know they're responding this way because they don't have the skills to do something else. So we can't expect that until we give them that piece. And keep giving them one more piece and one more piece, one more word or one more practice, and then we can expect that from them once we know it's in there. Is that all sit okay? Any other, I didn't check the time. Looks like we're over, sorry guys. I need to keep you. Any other big questions? Any other?
My question is, I mean, a lot of the conversations I try to have after school, I feel like it's almost I already know, I should know the answer to right now, and I'm just trying to get practice. The communication in the school is atrocious.
Okay.
And I don't know what to ask.
So you don't
because I
necessarily
can't
know.
get the communication from school.
Okay.
And sometimes I get answers and I don't think they're truthful because it's the same one every day. I know they're supposed to pick a different lunch buddy every day.
So it can't
every
possibly
day
be that
he
same
says he
kid.
eats with peers. Whether that lunch buddy system has dropped, I'm not certain. It's on the bulletin board when you walk in, you know what I mean? But I don't know how effective this communication is if it's not, I mean, slightly robotic or just spitting out an answer because he knows he's just going to answer my question. You know, and I don't know how to improve that because, I mean, we have full sentences, we have kind of back and forth.
Well, I mean,
but it's just, it's
my
not
thought would be, you know, obviously I know that the teachers have a whole lot on their plate as far as getting the communication back and forth. And so, you know, asking them to do tons and tons more is challenging. But maybe if you say, okay, I really, really want to work on this conversation with Zach when he gets home. Could you please try and make sure, and maybe even, you know, can you tell me for the week who his lunch buddies are going to be if you know? Or can you tell me at the end of the week who his lunch buddies were so I can at least...
If it's too far away from the event.
You know, or again, like, can you try and remember on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to put that in a note so that at least those 3 days a week I can ask that question. Or, you know, you guys, somebody picks him up, right? No, he takes the bus. You know, but trying to, you know, make it clear that this is a skill that he needs to work on, and in order for me to work on that skill at home, I need this information. Is there any way in your day that you can help me get that at least some of the days of the week so that I can practice with him? They just say no.
She He has to come home with scratches, he's come home, his clothes changed, nowhere on what happened. So, you know.
And there's no notebook or anything that goes
Oh,
back?
yes, we had it, she won't write it.
Okay.
We had it last in good safety, so like, and she would, at the end of the week, take a little time, write down what he did for a week and how he was progressing, whatever, just something real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And it meant the world to us, because let us know what was going on.
Are there other adults you could potentially get that communication from?
I've had a conversation with somebody at the school who claims it would be corrected, that it's not
Okay.
acceptable, but I haven't had a follow-up
Right,
conversation.
but I'm thinking also, you know, there's 3 adults in that classroom.
Two.
There's 2 teachers and not a paraprofessional?
No, she left and no one was told that it went from 3 to 2.
Okay.
That's the
These are
lack
things I can't actually do anything about.
That's
but,
the lack of communication.
But, you know, is one, or potentially the speech therapist. Or, you know, is there another parent who does pick up their kid who can get that information? You know, like, I think that the key piece for you is having some of that information.
Yeah, because like I said, I like to know the answers, because I don't think he's, I think he's just spitting things out because he's smart and he knows what to
And
say.
the other thing to think about for now, while you're working on getting that, is pick another, like, focused conversation.
It's just hard because it's so much of their day.
Right. This is
Majority of their week.
No, I understand, and I know that this is an important conversation. But while you're waiting to figure out how you can get some of that information, maybe start practicing a different conversation, so that he's starting to develop some of that back and forth, something that you do have the information for, and then be continuing to work. You know, if you've spoken to somebody, follow up on it. You know, I don't know if speech can give you more information when they see them. I don't know. I mean, again, I know that everybody's time is taxed, and it's really easy for me to be like, well, right,
It all
communication.
depends on the school, because when Liam started at one school, and I asked, like, how are we gonna communicate, and they were like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, how are we gonna talk about Liam's progress? What do you mean? But this school, I have everybody's email, and it's like, thank you for reaching out. You know,
Yeah.
they should be happy when a parent is reaching out and saying, I wanna learn, so I can continue that behavior.
It's also, you know, again, it depends on the number of kids in the class and things like that, and how many parents want how much communication, and sometimes it works out really well because you're the only parent that cares. So, or that wants that kind of, I don't want to say that parents don't care. Everybody cares, but that wants that kind of communication, so the teacher has more time to give you with that kind of communication. In some of the bigger classrooms, it's easier said than done. So then we have to brainstorm and think about how we can get at least some of that information, and or how we can work on these skills. If in the end we're not getting that information consistently, what's another conversation we can practice, or another thing we can talk about at school so that we do know the answer. You know, we know that they had that special assembly because I got that notice home, so we can talk about that. Or I know what was for lunch today because I packed it, or it's on the lunch menu, and kind of trying to work around some of that information, because the bottom line is you maybe only have so much control over.
Yeah, because I feel like I'm asking the same questions every day.
So trying to think about maybe some other questions that you do have the answers to is maybe the next step for that. And, you know.
So I'm sorry, you're saying that your teachers gives you a weekly report?
There's a newsletter that goes out to the class that tells one
Sort of
paragraph
abroad.
about what happened that week.
Oh.
And it's very vague. And if it's on a Monday, I can't talk on Saturday morning when I look at his backpack, something that he did 5 days before.
Right.
And
He doesn't
it's just hard.
necessarily
Yeah.
go into that.
It's just hard, so, it's a struggle.
Okay.
That's true, you know. Last year's teacher, she was excellent. She was so ultra organized, I loved it. And she had like daily reports as to what he eats, what he didn't eat, what did he do, and she would have feedback. I love her.
Sometimes-
Miss V. for
Sometimes, I know, and I don't quote me on this or anything, but sometimes I know that with schools and teachers who are having challenges, if you suggest or present some sort of checklist format that may be easier for them, sometimes they're open to trying it. You know, and then of course it's, you know, as long as it stays easy enough. So, I mean, that's something you could potentially try, even if it's just the two of you. So we were talking and we came up with, you know, and again, keeping in mind that they have a lot of challenges too, and that the day gets busy and there's a lot of kids and now there's 2 adults and not 3 and all those things. But maybe if the really important information you want is Lunch Buddy and one other thing, it's a checklist. It's in his backpack. She just got to check those things off and send it. You make a bunch of copies. She checks it off at the end of the day, sticks it in his backpack. And again, you can only ask. You certainly can't force it. But sometimes if it's created for them and it's easy, sometimes I've seen teachers and schools willing to try some of that. So it's just a thought. Again, every teacher is different and every class makeup is different. Certainly not for me. So, you know, from one year to the next, it may be easier for a teacher to do it and harder for a teacher to do it. It may even be the same teacher. You know, you were saying that, you know, Miss V is great at it. She was great at it last year, and maybe for some reason this year there's more kids who need help getting ready at the end of the day.
It was a new teacher.
Right.
Have you ever seen that put in an IEP as a requirement?
To facilitate the bridge from school to home and.
I don't know that I've seen it written in any formal part of the IEP. On the accommodations page, there may be a place to put it. So certainly can't hurt to try. And or sometimes in the narrative somewhere, you could kind of see if you could get that in there. If you really feel like it's something that is necessary to be developing these skills, bring it up at the team meeting and see what you can do about it. Is my only suggestion. Again, I'm trying to be neutral, and I know that everybody's, you know, it's hard on both ends, and so, but I do think that homeschool communication piece, whatever it turns out to look like, is really imperative for a lot of kids to be developing those skills.